Okay, good evening everybody, and come to order please. So good evening, a warm welcome to those of you attending and also our viewers watching live on the Council's YouTube channel, which is Hillingdon London. This is a meeting of the Corporate Services, Commerce and Communities Policy Overview Committee. My name is Councillor Richard Mills and I'm the chairman of tonight's meeting. A key role of this committee is to monitor the performance of local public services within our remit and hold in-depth reviews on topics of resident interest. We engage with a range of external witnesses in our activity, which can include community groups, residents and subject matter experts. Where we identify areas for change or improvement, we make recommendations to our decision-making cabinet. Details of the business to be considered today are shown on the agenda, copies of which a number of you will have in the room and are also accessible online on YouTube underneath the broadcast. For everyone present and who will be speaking tonight, please note that you are being filmed and any statements you make will be recorded and made public. For those of you in the public gallery, you will not be on camera. A reminder to everyone, councillors, officers and our guests speaking this evening, that you should turn the microphone button on when speaking, and that will make the microphone red, lit up as mine is currently. This will ensure that you can be heard in the room and by those watching online. So firstly, going around the table tonight, I will introduce everybody present. From a member side, on my right, Councillor Wayne Bridges, Councillor Alan DeVille, Councillor Nicola Brightman, Councillor Martin Goddard and Councillor Farhad Chubadar. And on my left, Councillor Lindsay Bliss and Councillor Scott Farley. We are joined by officers tonight from Democratic Services, Luke Taylor, we're taking the minutes of the meeting, Fiona Gibbs, who's a Stronger Communities Manager, David Knowles, the Head of Transport and Town Centre Projects, Inga Spencer, Senior Economic Development Officer, and Cheryl Dixon, an Economic Development Officer. We're also joined this evening, two witnesses, Mr Mike Langan, the Chairman of Hillingdon Chamber of Commerce, and Jonathan Seymour, the Treasurer of Hillingdon Chamber of Commerce, and welcome to you all. Before we get started with the main agenda, some quick housekeeping. There is no fire alarm expected, so if it does go off, please follow Luke out of the building and he will take us to the designated meeting point outside. Please ensure that mobile devices are turned off unless you are using it for the purpose of following the agenda, in which case please try and limit it to that use. That concludes all of the housekeeping items, so then we can move on to the full agenda. And agenda item 1 for tonight is apologies for absence.
We've had apologies from Councillor Dillon.
Thank you. Agenda item 2, any declarations of interest before us this evening? No, thank you. Agenda item 3, minutes of the previous meeting held on the 10th of October 2019. Does anyone have any comments or suggestions, amendments to these? Otherwise, you have to take them as agreed? Thank you, they are agreed. Agenda item 4 is exclusion of press and public. All items before us this evening are part 1 items, so will be heard in public. Which brings us to agenda item 5, which is our major review on local commerce, employment, skills and job creation within the borough. This is the third witness session that we've had on this topic now, including we've had an additional site visit. So I'm pleased to welcome tonight from the Hillingdon Chamber of Commerce, Mike and Jonathan, who are going to talk to us about their experience, about working as a chamber, running businesses, what it's actually like on the ground across the borough, how businesses are impacted, what their view on the economy is, and also what their interaction with the council is. So, Mike, I think if you're going to start, I'll pass over to you, and then we'll come in with questions once we've heard from you both.
Thank you. I just thought I'd start off by just giving a short history of the Chamber. The Chamber was started way back in 1908, so it's one of the oldest chambers in London. I got involved with the Chamber when I worked at NatWest in Uxbridge because one of my senior managers wanted each of his managers to be involved in local matters. So I was asked to become involved with the local Chamber. It was called Uxbridge and West Drayton Chamber of Commerce. I went to a meeting at the Nave and I met Nick from the local accountants. I think he's long moved away from Uxbridge now, and a lady called Breda Penny, who was quite well known in the area. She ran a cafe in Windsor Street. They both wanted to give up the job, and so I was eventually voted in as secretary, and a guy called Roger Williams, who ran an accountancy firm in West Drayton called Hugels, was the chairman. There were about 10 members left in the chamber at that time. There was also a chain of office, and this was donated to the Uxbridge Library, and it's still there now. I just mentioned some chamber activities. Working with the council, the Chamber managed to persuade the introduction of half-hour free parking in the high streets and a special rate for first card holders. That was something that the Chamber was very passionate about. The Chamber runs a number of regular networking events with partners and has an informative website. We also run seminars on various topics, and currently we're talking about social media, etc. We've been involved in the Heathrow Summit, which is a supply chain for businesses to obtain contracts from the airlines and the airport. That's been running for 26 years. The Chamber has an annual review of the year every November, and it's held at Jonathan's office on the 27th of November this year. We also have an annual event with West London Film Studios, which is based in the south of the borough. We also have an annual barbecue at Brunel each year, and the proceeds from that goes to the Mayor's Charity every year. And we also visit the Mayor's Charity once a year. But one of our main events is the flagship event, is the Expo, the Hillingdon Expo. We've run it for 5 years, and next year will be the 6th year. I'm very lucky that we have a very experienced committee. We have 9 people on the committee, and I'll pass that round afterwards because there's the list of the committees on there. And they fulfil various roles on the committee, which is, I'd like to stress that we're a voluntary organisation. So we give all of the people, experienced business people, and they give their time up freely to run the Chamber. And they have various roles. We're on the Local Strategic Partnership, which was this afternoon. We sit on the Institute of Technology at Uxbridge College, Hayes Town Partnership, Expo Committee, West London Business Awards Panel, Hayes Business Forum, Ruislip Manor Chamber of Commerce, Heathrow Economic Forum, to name but a few. I'm just going to hand over now to Jonathan because he'll talk a little bit about a supply chain, because I understand today that the supply chain has been signed off and the Chamber may be involved in the supply chain for 2020. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Just to introduce myself, I'm the Treasurer of the Hillingdon Chamber of Commerce, but in my spare time I'm a partner at Moore Kingston Smith, who are a firm of business advisors, and we've been based in Hayes for 40 years, and we're a top 20 firm of business advisors in terms of the UK. What I thought I'd do is just talk a little bit about the supply chain and where I think that could help in terms of Hillingdon businesses, and perhaps how we could work with the council in terms of that. Firstly, it's important, and it was interesting to see the figures that were in this publication, which is the Corporate Services Scoping Report, in terms of the number of SMEs in terms of Hillingdon. It's absolutely fascinated, but 99.3% of businesses are SMEs in terms of the Hillingdon area, which is really interesting in terms of clearly they're at the heart of driving economic growth in terms of the area, and that leads me on really to talk about how I think we should be working in terms of with those businesses, developing a strong local supply chain. And I think the council has developed some initiatives, and I was reading in the report with SEGRO how you've looked at developing initiatives in terms of engaging with local businesses, and the benefits in terms of doing that I think are enormous in terms of the area. It helps prioritise local SMEs in terms of giving work to them. In turn, what that does is it helps build and make stronger businesses in terms of the borough, and supplier networks, which then creates further impetus in terms of growth. It minimises the impact on the environment, of course, because we're then engaging with local businesses, which I think is something that we should be doing. And it also helps in terms of that there's a greater predictability in terms of delivery if we're dealing with local businesses, especially if we're looking at developments like the SEGRO development at Nestles in terms of engaging with local businesses. So I think that's really important in terms of the outlook, in terms of what we should be looking to achieve, in terms of moving towards. And I think there's a number of ways that contracting authorities and Tier 1 contractors can engage in terms of this process. And I've just outlined 3 areas where I think where we need to focus on. I mean, certainly Mike mentioned the supply chain in terms of Heathrow Airport, and that has been hugely successful. We've gone along there for a number of years. 26 years, Mike says. And it's just hugely successful in terms of the amount of work that local businesses can pick up on in terms of the airport, and I just think that could maybe be replicated in terms of the borough, and it's something that we need to look at. So what the 3 areas that I really focused on in terms of this is really understanding what the current position is in terms of local businesses, looking at the size of the businesses, which obviously we've got some stats here, and I don't really know where you get these statistics from, but they're very interesting. But what would be useful to know as well is what nature of services these businesses provide, the size of the businesses, and the amount of spend that they have in terms of their businesses themselves, because we need to have that robust data really then to understand how we can look at improving the supply chain in terms of local businesses. And we then need to set some measurement targets in terms of, for example, SEGRO. I'm not quite sure what targets were set in terms of them, but I think then obviously the next step is looking at then engaging and finding out exactly whether they've met those measurement targets. I think also in terms of the supply chain, there needs to be some visibility in terms of future opportunities. So really understanding, well, where are the large projects going to be in terms of the borough, who's going to be involved in those projects, and how they're going to engage with local businesses. I could see that from the report you had from SEGRO that they were advertising in terms of employment in terms of the area, but I would be interested to know, well, how many people then took up employment in terms of the project at SEGRO. I'd be interested to know what amount of spend SEGRO then spent in terms of local businesses. I think that's something that needs to be looked at. And then the third thing that I think needs to be looked at is simplifying the process for businesses in terms of procurement and the supply chain, and make it very simple for SMEs in terms of engaging with, whether it be with contracting authorities or Tier 1 contractors, in terms of how easy it is to engage, because certainly from my past experience of working with businesses and talking to businesses within Hillingdon Chamber of Commerce, our members, they often find it quite frustrating in terms of the procedures that they need to go through in terms of the supply chain. So I think that's something that needs to be looked at as well. So there's some food for thought there in terms of the local supply chain. But I think it's fair to say that us as a chamber would like to help the council in terms of how you can develop this supply chain and this concept of a supply chain, and making it efficient for local businesses, so that, you know, those benefits that I spoke about, we can help achieve those. So that's it.
Thank you very much. Happy to open up to questions any members have. Whilst people are having a think, can I just ask what if you can describe the relationship between yourself as a chamber and the council? How do you work together? Where do you get support? What is it in terms of events where we've done like work on the town centres? How does that work with you?
Yes, we work with the council on the town centres, improving the shop front scheme is which I think you're referring to, because obviously part of one of our members is Les Russell from Ruislip Manor Chamber, which you've done as well, and Hayes Town has been done as well. So you've done some work on the town centres there, and one of the best parts of that work was that you were also training the shopkeepers in how to do their business, because the problem we found was that a lot of people go in to open a shop without much background or any expertise, and the trouble is they're not sure how they go about it. So by helping them to arrange their shop and position it, and it was very helpful. So that part of the scheme was very useful.
Thank you. Councillor Brightman.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Given that the majority of the businesses in Hillingdon are micro businesses, over 13,000 of them in 2018, what initiatives are there to try and introduce them into tendering for larger contracts, perhaps as a group, so that they're eligible?
As a group?
Yes, because often you need to have more than a one-man band to fulfil a contract. As part of the integration process, are there any initiatives by Hillingdon Chamber of Commerce to bring together, for instance, decorators or builders so that they can tender for larger contracts than they would usually do?
Well, that's what we hope the supply chain will be. You know, we'll be able to get them to work on that. And again, once we got a clear picture of what's expected, we will be able to deal with that. We have done that with the Heathrow supply chain, because some of our members have gone there and they've worked together, because we have a stand at the summit, and we've had a stand there for the 26 years it's been in existence. And basically, we've introduced businesses to each other, because sometimes the value of the contract, as you say, is too big for one particular company, and they need to subcontract with other companies. And we've introduced one or two together, and that has helped in the past.
I think, sorry, I'll just make one point as well, that it's fair to say that the Chamber itself is funded by subscriptions, essentially, quite modest subscriptions, and as Mike said, we're all volunteers. So our funding is fairly limited in terms of our reach, in terms of being able to develop the supply chain. So at the moment, we've not really done anything per se in terms of that, other than be involved in terms of the supply chain, as I said, with Heathrow Airport, and assist in terms of that. So we've not really had the opportunity to develop it at this point in time.
Councillor Bliss.
Yes, you say you've done a lot of work with the town centres. Representing a North Hayes ward, I'd like to sort of know whether you'll be spreading that out to the surrounding areas rather than just concentrating on the town centres.
Sorry, is that really a focus for me, or is it a question for the chamber?
The chamber, really.
Okay.
They said they sort of have focused a lot on the town centres, and I just wondered whether there were any plans to expand that to include areas outside town centres.
What we tried to encourage was various parts of the borough to have their own chamber, which was working with us as the chamber for the borough. So consequently, we used to have at one time, there was 5 or 6 local borough chambers, such as West Drayton and Useley. And we also had one in the Eastcote. We also had one there's one still going in Ruislip. But the ones that are affiliated to us are the Ruislip Manor Chamber of Commerce and the Hayes Chamber of Commerce, and they're affiliated to the chamber. So we work closely with those. North Hayes, we probably got no members of the chamber in that particular area, but we would be happy to work with any of those particular places if they show an interest. But the problem is we're all volunteers. We haven't got the time to run those places for them, and we rely on that committee, them to form a committee to be run in their little area, if you know what I mean. And that's how it should happen, really. You know, so to have representation.
Councillor Goddard.
Thank you. Clearly, from what you say, the chamber's quite well established. It's been going a long time. I'm not clear how many members you have, how many businesses are represented in through the chamber.
We've got over 300 members currently, are members of the chamber, and that includes the affiliated members, which is I've mentioned, which is Ruislip Manor Chamber of Commerce and Hayes Business Forum, and that's run by David Bruff, as you probably all know David, and he runs that. There's probably 60 members in Hayes at the moment, and there's probably about 30 or 40 in Rushden Manor, and the rest are all small businesses dotted around the whole borough. So that's over 300 members that we've got in, and they're on our website anyway.
Okay, so that's a good constituency, actually. It's a fair
Yes.
proportion of the business community. I mean, clearly one of the subjects of discussion here is the whole issue of procurement and supply
Yes.
chain.
Yes.
If we can set that aside for a moment, I mean, I'm not dismissing it, but clearly there are challenges in terms of varying procurement rules and making it easier for local businesses. But if we set that to one side, can you comment a bit on the business climate as your members see it? Are there some common themes? And if putting aside the procurement thing for a moment, as I said, are there some other things which are common concerns and issues that could and should be addressed by the council?
Well, the main concern, of course, for the high street at the moment is that business rates has been a topic that's been talked about for about 20 years, as long as I've been in the chamber. And I used to run a small business in Hayes at one time, so I know what business rates, what problems there are. The problem we've got is that the government, whichever government of the day, have never dealt with the high street issue at all, and they've all fobbed it off because they've always had something else to worry about. But I don't know if there's been various studies, and I think there was a report out last week about the high streets again. And the very simple thing is there's no level playing field in the high street, because what happens is the person who runs his shop in the high street's got to pay rent, business rates, etc. And you've got big companies come over here, open up big warehouse and pay no business rates. So therefore, the burden of business rates falls on the wrong sector. And it's been a study that has not been dealt with by the government at all. They've talked about it, when hopefully next year, whenever the change of government takes place, that they will concentrate their minds on looking at the high street, because it's been put off for years. I think that's one of the big issues that people have got. Apart from that, it's all the businesses are struggling with getting people to work in their businesses, and that's what the feeling we get from people. They're saying we can't grow our business because we can't get the right people, and that's one of the problems that we face. So we obviously work with education authorities and Brunel, etc., and all those people to try and say that, look, you need to be getting people out ready to go to the workplace, because that's what the businesses need. I mean, most of the recruitment, Hillingdon happens to be a very an area where there's low unemployment, and of course, if you want to expand in Hillingdon, you've got to look further afield to get your people to work for you, which is a problem for the small businesses.
Councillor Bridges?
Sorry, one other thing just to mention in terms of that, and it's probably outside of the control of everybody in this room, but I think the other uncertainty for businesses obviously is Brexit and the kind of economic climate that we're in at the moment. So certainly many of the clients that I work with are struggling in terms of the uncertainty.
Thank you. Councillor Bridges?
Thank you, Chairman. It was partially answered, but I'll ask the question. Your relationship with schools and educating people in terms of start-ups, what is your relationship with the schools, and can you give examples of the work you've done to date? We have a relationship with quite a few schools through the Hayes Business Forum, as you know, because they put on various events, and we work with them very closely. And we work also closely with Ruislip and their schools. But the rest of the borough, the schools tend to be doing their own thing, and we do have some occasions that we've helped out with the schools and gone in and talked to the pupils, etc. But it's something that needs addressing. That the school, because when I went to school, there was always a careers teacher in the schools. Now that seems to have disappeared, and so what happens is you've got schools who don't know what's happening in the world outside them. They're outside their gates, and they don't know how the business operates around, and that's the problem. And it's something that's we as a chamber, because our main aim is obviously to look after our members. So to diverse and to try and help with the schools, it's not our priority as such, but we will help out where we can. And we have been into schools and we have talked to them, and we've been into the colleges. In fact, we go into Uxbridge on quite a few occasions because we support their awards. We actually give awards to them, and we get into the awards ceremony as well.
Sorry, one other thing in terms of that as well is that we do also engage quite closely with Brunel University and also the Central Research Laboratory.
Thinking of small businesses, effectively shopkeepers on the high street, would the majority of those in the borough be people within the borough setting up businesses, or do you find that they're people living outside the borough who want to come and set up a business or run a shop within Hillingdon?
Probably split is about 50-50 on that. You know, there's quite a few people who run businesses who run them who live outside the borough. I mean, I'll give you one or two examples in Hayes, for instance, like the hairdresser in Hayes. They live outside the borough, but they run their business in Hayes. And probably you've got the same in Ruislip. But it's not necessarily people from within Hillingdon that are coming to set up their businesses. It's split between the two.
So on those that are coming from outside, what is it that you think makes them want to run their business in Hillingdon?
Well, they see an opportunity. Maybe that particularly there isn't that sort of service being offered in the high street or where it is, and so they see that, and they obviously come in and say, we'll set up a business here selling model aircraft, for instance, or something like that, specialist sort of shops.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, one other thing in terms of that as well is I think it's not focusing so much on the high street, but in terms of people coming to the borough. It's initiatives like the Central Research Laboratory, where if you could replicate that 3-4 times over in the borough, I think you're going to have a very, very vibrant economy. As a business, the business that I work for, we engage quite closely with the Central Research Laboratory. We do quite a lot of work, pro bono work, with the businesses there, helping them on their business journey. I think it's a fantastic initiative. If somehow the council could replicate that type of formula elsewhere, I think you're going to be going a long way to having a much more engaging business community, because I think it's absolutely fantastic what's happened there. And if somehow, as I said, that could be replicated in terms of other parts of the borough, I think that would be great.
Councillor Brightman.
Thank you, Chairman. You mentioned skills shortage. Which areas specifically? What, accountancy, sales? What sort of areas should we be encouraging people to brush up on if they want to find employment?
Quite simply, the biggest area is construction. We've got South of Waterside next door to us, 26-year development, and when you go on that site, which I've been on several times, not much English is spoken on the site because it's mainly made up of people from overseas. Problem we've got is that we know there's going to be a lot of construction in this country. We knew that 10 years ago. We knew it 15 years ago. But what have we done? We've not actually invested in the colleges to train people for the skills of construction. There was some bits and pieces done in Hillingdon over the years, but not on a regular basis. So you've got the bigger companies have actually set up, they've set up a big construction academy on the South of Waterside development, which is worth going to see, because we should be doing something like that in Hillingdon, because obviously we've got a lot of construction going in the borough, because that's going to continue, I believe, isn't it?
Councillor Bridges.
Thank you again, Chairman. I'd be very interested to know your thoughts on what your members are telling you about the internet. Do you find it a friend or a threat? We've seen in the news various empty shops they feel might be contributing towards that. Are they adapting to it? Do they use the internet in addition to their own shop fronts and shops? Or I'd just be interested to know your thoughts on that.
It's a big threat to most of the businesses in the high street, because unfortunately a lot of the people, as I was saying earlier, the problem they've got is that people have gone in to run those businesses and they need help in how they run their business, because people think you can open up a shop door and start a business tomorrow. You can't. You need some training and expertise on it. Where is that training coming from? It's not coming from the colleges. It's not coming from, it needs to be coming from somewhere, because it's not easy to set up a business and start running it, because you've got to understand that as a business person, if you've got a load of things responsible to do. You've got to look after the accountant, make sure, the accounts are done, etc. And it's a hard task. Now, the internet is affecting a lot of businesses because, how do they compete against it? And that's their problem. And again, it's training them to make sure their business is efficient and they embrace it. But at the moment, I don't think it's happening.
Councillor Goddard.
Thank you, Chairman. You don't have to look too far to see bad news in terms of the attrition that's going on in high streets throughout the country. This week's just brought another one in Mothercare. In general, and then possibly it's a dangerous generalisation, but in Hillingdon, our high streets aren't doing too badly at the moment. But, my feeling is that one has to look ahead, and one has to say, well, at some stage in the future, we'll be facing challenges of high streets with empty shops, and we need to have a strategy for the regeneration of our high streets. Do you and your members have views on how that regeneration should look?
I went to hear a talk by a guy called Bill Grimsey, which is worth, if you ever look that up, Bill Grimsey, because Bill Grimsey ran various big companies, and he was born in Hertfordshire, and he talked about the high street and what needs to be done in the high street. And basically he was talking about in his mother's day, my mother goes shopping, she'd go to the butchers, bakers and all the rest of it. So you'd have 3 or 4 shops in the high street and she'd go to each of those. Now that's the high street changed and it's evolving. What's happened in the high street is this. We've got to drive traffic into the high street, because what we've done with planning policies, we've driven traffic away from the high streets. We gave the likes of Tesco's too much leeway, so they built these massive big stores and everybody went to these big stores and didn't go into the high street. Luckily, Hillingdon was doing the half an hour free parking, which has helped our high street. So while you mentioned about why our high streets are not suffering as bad as, say, Southall and Ealing and all the rest of the places, is because of that you did some years ago. So the council can be congratulated on that. But that's the sort of thing we've got to do, is get the high street, drive traffic to the high street. So we need doctors' surgeries in the high street. We need dentists in the high street. We need a hospital. We don't want a hospital tucked away, miles away from anywhere. We need it in the high street. These are the sort of things we should be doing. Planning policies are getting people to go to that high street. It's a destination. And if you listen to what Bill Grimsey said, he talked about it 20 years ago, and he wrote a big book about it. He was a government advisor, and he was ahead of his time. But unfortunately, we need to learn from that, but it's getting the traffic into the high street. I mean, one of the things we're doing now probably is we're putting people to live in the high streets, above shops and stuff like that. So we're converting shops and people are living there. So, but it's getting the activities into the high street. Put the cinemas back in the high streets and put your bingo halls in the high street. Don't put them miles away. Cluster them together.
Thank you. Can I ask officers, do you have anything anyone wishes to add or contribute on the back of what we've heard? No? That's fine. No? Okay. Thank you. Both, thank you very much for attending tonight. I know you did say you had a presentation or paperwork. I'll make sure that we get a copy of that and we circulate that amongst all members subsequently. But otherwise, thank you very much for coming, giving your views on how everything is actually going on the ground across the borough in Hillingdon. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to come and talk to you, and if you need anything else from the Chamber, we'd be more than happy to oblige. Thank you.
Okay, so that takes us on to agenda item 6, community cohesion. Fiona's prepared a report paper on this. Fiona, if you're okay, just talk us through some of the highlights from your report, if that's okay, please.
Yeah, that's fine. Oh, okay. So, As the report outlines, community cohesion relies upon quite a complex set of factors that enables individuals from different backgrounds to contribute to and feel part of the community, and indeed just as complex are those factors which actually challenge that cohesion and sense of belonging. So it's really important that we build strong foundations, promote those opportunities where we can bring people together and where they feel they can participate in the local area. So from the report you can see there are a number of ways as the Council that we aim to promote cohesion and integration, and what underpins this work really is the importance of working in partnership, not only with other statutory agencies but alongside our voluntary sector and diverse communities. So in terms of that, there's a series of approach really, and that's done through engagement, through partnership working, through our communications, but also about our events and activities that we provide to our residents as such, so for those opportunities for people to come together. What's really important is how we engage with and how we reach out to different communities, different parts of the community. Through our partnership working, we've particularly identified 3 groups in terms of a priority around that, and particularly around women, and particularly isolated women, women from different community backgrounds who may find it more difficult to integrate, to engage in our communities, working with our faith communities as well to promote understanding, build positive relationships, and promote a shared understanding of community and the activity that faith communities do and how we reach out. But also working through schools and young people, particularly if you can reach young people, often you can reach their parents, their wider families and the wider community. So they're sort of 3 key areas that we do quite a lot of work around building those relationships with and doing activities, as I've said in the report. Communications, how we promote our activities, how we ensure that all our communities can have access to our services, but also through utilising our libraries, our community events, creating those community hubs, creating those spaces where people can come and be and engage. And that's not just about I think we have to be really clear that community cohesion isn't just about ethnicity, isn't just about faith, it's also about age, gender, disability, everyone. How do people have that opportunity to feel part of the community, to have opportunities to come together and to get involved and promote that sense of cohesion? So, as I said, that's sort of our approach in terms of working in partnership, looking at what are the issues, what are the challenges, how do we then bring communities together, but also spreading that message about it's about everyone and creating those opportunities for all. So I'm happy to take some questions.
Thanks very much, Fiona. I think it's a very comprehensive report and highlights the huge amount of work that's being done. I think at times it's almost taken for granted that all this work goes on in the background to generate what we have across the borough in terms of a strong sense of community and integration. Does anyone have any questions? Councillor Bliss?
Yes, sorry, I actually have a few. First off, I believe there are partnership meetings. I just wondered how regularly they're held and how many members there are, and whether at some stage we could sort of see minutes from these meetings.
We have something called the Stronger Communities Partnership, which is predominantly made up of our external partner agencies and representation from the voluntary sector and faith communities. They generally meet quarterly. I'm happy to share minutes of meetings. We've got a meeting scheduled actually for November. The aim really is to look at what are our priorities and how are we working and to develop those programmes. But in terms of, we also have things like the Interfaith Network. We have a Women in the Community Network as well, which brings community groups together. So so we have those meetings in terms of looking at how can we work with our community groups as well. So I'm happy to sort of share the plan that we have from the Stronger Communities Partnership if you want to see that, and how we're moving forward. And it feeds into the local strategic partnership priorities as well, who've outlined a priority around promoting community cohesion. So.
You may, yes.
Yeah, it says working with local women's groups and other partners to encourage women to come together. I just wondered how you're how you're getting through to the people who are not part of women's groups. Those who you've already identified may need extra support in order to be able to access this kind of thing.
As I said, obviously we're working with lots of different community organisations. There are voluntary sector groups as well, because when you look at, so it's in terms of, it's not just about my role, it's also, in terms of our library services, our comprehensive work around including people with dementia, working with people with mental health needs, looking at how do we work with our across our other agencies who are working with different groups in order to promote activity that bring people together. So I think it's about looking at what mainstream services are doing, but also where are, like I said, our libraries, our community events that create opportunities for people coming together. There's a lot of work that the voluntary sector does as well in order to provide opportunities for people to engage and be supported. So it's looking at the whole of the borough in terms of what activity are people doing and how do we make those connections across agencies, across community groups, across services in terms of working more effectively together. So a lot of the role that I do is about looking at how do we join up the activity that people are doing. So, for example, our faith communities, our faith buildings offer a lot of opportunity and a lot of cross-sector working in terms of, if you look at Christchurch in the town centre, for example, they have a lot of activities that are provided in partnership with voluntary sector or the use of their spaces and their buildings for that activity. So it's quite complex in terms of saying how are we reaching. It's about how do we support and bring different people together who are providing those opportunities. So it's sort of acting as a bit of a conduit as well in terms of how we reach out and how we work across all sectors really, and try and sort of have a cohesive mix and try and promote those opportunities rather than duplicating things. So how do we work together? If a women's group is doing an activity in one part, how do we encourage others to join up? So it's really looking at how do we make those relationships. Community cohesion for me is about relationships. How do we build that relationship in our communities? How do we make best use of the social capital that we have? Because it's not just about what the council does, it's about what else are others doing out there in the community, and how do we sort of try and join that up as best we can, really.
Can I just follow that up a little bit? Because,
can you put your microphone on?
Sorry. We have an awful lot of isolated people throughout the borough, isolated for a number of reasons, be they carers, maybe not having a grasp of the language, various other problems, and I can't really see how we get to those people.
Like I say, I think that's reliant upon all different parts of the council, as well as our voluntary sector partners and our community organisations. So I think that's a huge piece of work to undertake, to map exactly how and where all of those opportunities are. But we do fund our voluntary sector. We have a very strong grants programme that supports our voluntary sector in terms of reaching out to different communities, whether that be age, whether that be carers, whether that be people with disabilities, mental health, and so forth. So there's a whole range of programmes and activities that we support as the council in terms of where those then voluntary sector organisations can reach out to those communities, as well as, like I say, the activities that we do within our own services, whether that's statutory provision or whether that is through more of our leisure and other facilities. So it's sort of looking at the whole picture. In terms of building those relationships with communities that might not engage, a lot of that work through building relationships with different communities, with our diverse communities, working with different partners about trying to promote those opportunities, build those relationships and break down barriers, takes time, but also it's about how do we encourage people within those community groups to promote that as well. So there's an element of different aspects of how to work and how to engage across, if that makes sense.
I'll just make one final point.
Okay, final one, and then
final one,
yeah.
Promise. Do you think you're doing enough to support community events like the Hayes Community Fun Day and Hayes Canal Festival?
In terms of supporting people to get involved or reaching out to groups,
Sorry, supporting them to go ahead, be successful and to engage in the communities.
Personally, in my role as Stronger Community, I am a team of one. In Stronger Community, in terms of working with colleagues who are leading on Hayes Fun Day, as it's now called, we have done a lot of work trying to encourage groups to take part. I think we've had lots of conversation about what's the challenge of enabling or for communities to get involved. I think across the voluntary sector, people are finding it harder to get people to volunteer generally. So I think there is a challenge around that, but we do what we can through schools, through our community networks, to encourage people to participate. We work as hard as we can to enable that to happen. I think there's just a challenge around a lot of groups are finding it harder and have less volunteers generally, whether that's faith communities or voluntary organisations. So sometimes it's more about the challenges that they're facing in terms of getting people to run stalls, etc., and the challenge around that. So I would say that actually participation in the Hayes Fun Day, yes, it is a challenge because of that, but there has been more diversity in terms of people attending the events. We've done quite a lot of work about trying to promote that over the last few years. So, and we have seen a difference in people actually attending. I think actually voluntary groups participating, it's more of a challenge for them, and I think that's just a reflection of generally how hard that is.
Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Chairman. I was wondering, I've got a couple of questions as well. I was curious how you are measuring success with cohesion, or how the council is measuring it from your point of view. I'm not clear from the report what you are measuring and how you're measuring it, and what your sort of goals are.
Okay. In terms of cohesion, it is quite complex, and obviously I laid out different factors within the report. There used to be a national survey that asked people about how do you feel people get on in your local community, and that sort of research isn't undertaken or hasn't been undertaken in more recent times. So I think it's a measure of different things. In terms of Hillingdon as a borough, I would say generally we're quite cohesive. When you look at, there are numbers of factors that you can look at in terms of do we have lots of unrest in the borough? We don't tend to have that. Do we have organised groups that promote unrest and promote particular divisive ideals, ideologies? Not hugely in our borough. We have, in terms of hate crime figures, yes, nationally hate crime figures have gone up, but we don't generally see this a huge spike as other areas do when there are issues that might generate that spike. So I think so generally in terms of it's what factors are missing as well as what factors are there, and it's looking at a different combination of those, looking generally how do people participate, how do they engage, but also it is generally about what community tensions do we have, and when there are incidents that might impact on community tensions, we don't tend to see those rise in the borough. In fact, community groups come together. So I think it's very complex in terms of saying how do we know we're successful. I guess we only know when something challenges that might challenge that cohesion. And thankfully, so far, we've not experienced that. But that is about how you build those relationships in preparation for that. You can never be complacent, I think. And it's about understanding what might those pressure points be or what are the potentials. And a lot of the work that we do is around trying to identify that. So I work very closely with local police in terms of understanding what those community dynamics might be and looking at what do we need to do in order to address that, and who do we need to work with in order to perhaps mitigate against that. I think a lot of it is around education as well. Doing a lot of work with schools and young people around these issues, trying to generate the opportunity for people to feel that they can trust us and have those conversations. So I've worked in the borough for 14 years, have quite strong relationships with a lot of our different communities, voluntary sector organisations, partners, and have those regular conversations. So it's how do you build that trust and relationship is really important. But I think it's also how we work. And I think one of the strengths in Hillingdon is how we work across those partnerships. We're very strong in our partnership working, how we work with our other agencies. So I think that just helps in terms of how and what we're doing, really. And I think just our general approach as a local authority about trying to provide services for all as much as we can, and it's helps with that sense of people feeling that they're involved in their community.
Do a follow-up, yeah.
Thank you. Part of what you said is sort of comes to my next sort of question. You were mentioning about sort of people sowing seeds of disharmony, or however you want to put it, sort of bringing cohesion down. Do you work with other parts of the council which monitor social media? Because I am aware of groups within the borough on social media that are actively promoting discontent and against people in the community. I was wondering what you and how you are countering things of that nature.
I'd be quite interested to know what your concerns are. Maybe we'll take that offline. In terms of understanding, I have work with police very closely in terms of monitoring what's going on in the borough. I think the challenge with social media is how are others responding to what others are promoting in social media. If I'm made aware of people, colleagues do often share what they're seeing. Maybe we need to it's something that if you're seeing things that haven't been flagged to me, that I might need to think about whether that is comprehensive enough. So it's a challenge to me. But generally, when we're made aware of it, it's about looking at how is that played out. Because I think sometimes we can intervene and we can escalate things. So I'm always keen on the approach of how measured are we in terms of, and how proportionate are we in our response. If other people, I often look at what people are saying, and if others are challenging from the community or individuals are challenging, that's much more powerful than us wading in and going, right, okay, we need to do something about this. Because actually, if somebody else, if you're creating that dialogue, and I think it's really it's healthy to encourage people to challenge each other obviously in a non-threatening way. And often I do see that when people, I know there have been a couple of issues in the borough recently where people are promoting one perspective, and others have actually challenged that and questioned it and said, no, actually the reality of this is this. So it's about just looking at what is going on and escalating when we need to and intervening where we need to. But often I think the power comes from communities themselves. So a lot of the work we try to do is equipping people to feel okay to challenge and take that on themselves. So social media is a constant challenge. It's a constant, for all of us, in a way of how we monitor that and how we respond to that. But I think sometimes we have to be, like I say, we have to be proportionate and careful about how we or when we might intervene as the local authority in terms of that.
Okay, Councillor Brightman.
Thank you, Chairman. Very good work, by the way. Just one quick question, please. You in the Casey review of 2016, which you've highlighted here, it says stronger safeguards for children not in mainstream education. And I just wondered what policies you have in terms of reaching them, because obviously that's where problems can fester.
It does, and it's actually it is a challenge, that one, because out of school settings, etc., there are challenges around registration and how we identify. There are challenges around how much we can intervene in homeschooling, etc., etc. So the best we can do, again, is about looking at, well, do we understand who might be utilising those venues? How can we engage with those that we do know, and try and encourage them to adopt safeguarding policies, etc. Work very closely with social care colleagues and our education colleagues in terms of identifying concerns that they might have. Be careful from a sensitive point of view, but in terms of we do work collaboratively across them through the Safeguarding Board and through the other safeguarding work that I do, in terms of having those conversations and sort of having early alerts if people are concerned that there are issues around that. But I think the challenge for us as an authority is our limits in terms of our statutory powers on that. So we can only do the best we can to try and go and speak to families and work with those organisations that we are aware of in terms of making sure that those safeguards are in place as best we can.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Fiona, for that report. I think the committee will be happy to note that. Thank you. So move to agenda item 7, which is the forward plan. I think members now be aware that the Cabinet meeting on the 12th of December, Democratic Services have communicated that has been moved to Tuesday the 17th. Also, just to note in that, following on the work that Fiona has talked through, there will be a report in that on promoting stronger communities and equality in Hillingdon, which was a request coming from a motion, I believe, that went through full council. Anyone have any questions or comments on the rest of the forward plan? Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies if I've missed this. So, item 27. I was wondering when it's referring to consultation on the decision to this committee. I was wondering when we were getting sight of that, if it's in advance of the December Cabinet meeting, and our next meeting, I think, is in January. I was wondering how that sort of.
So, Luke, can we check that from memory? I don't think we've been consulted on it before as a committee, the voluntary sector grants. But if we can check that, because otherwise, that timetable clearly doesn't align. Yeah. Okay. With that, happy to note. Thank you. And then the work programme, agenda item 8. Our next meeting scheduled January 14th, where we'll be looking at the findings from our major review, as well as the Cabinet budget proposals for the next financial year. So that is what will be presented to Cabinet in the December meeting. That will come before us as a committee in January, as well as a single item report on counter-fraud enforcement actions, and a review of a previous review that this committee carried out on recruitment, which briefly came back to us a few months ago, maybe 6 to 9 months ago, but wasn't at a stage where enough work had been carried out to be able to review it fully. Everyone happy to know that? Thank you very much. That closes the meeting.